At dawn on October 14, 1066, a cold mist clung to the hills of southern England. On a ridge near the small town of Hastings, a line of Anglo-Saxon warriors locked their shields tight, their breath steaming in the autumn air. Below them, spread across the fields, the Norman army gathered, armored cavalry, archers, and infantry under the banner of Duke William of Normandy. The clash that was about to begin would decide not only who ruled England, but the very future of its people, its language, and its culture. And at the heart of the story lies a single moment, a single arrow, said to have struck King Harold Godwinson in the eye. Whether truth or legend, that arrow became the symbol of the day England changed forever. The story of Hastings begins with a death. In January of 1066, King Edward the Confessor of England passed away without leaving an heir. His death created not only a vacant throne, but also a dangerous uncertainty that spread through the realm. Almost at once, Harold Godwinson, the powerful Earl of Wessex, was crowned king, stepping into the void with the support of England's nobles. But even as the crown was placed upon his head, rivals were already sharpening their claims. From the north came Harold Hardrada, the fearsome king of Norway, who declared that ancient agreements gave him the right to England's crown. And across the English Channel, Duke William of Normandy asserted that Edward himself had promised him succession, and that Harold had once sworn an oath to uphold that promise. In a single moment, Edward's death turned England into the prize in a brutal contest of ambition, a kingdom about to be fought over with sword and fire. Harold Godwinson, crowned king in January, knew he would be challenged, but he could not have predicted how quickly the storm would come. In September 1066, the Norwegians under Harold Hardrada, joined by Harold's own traitorous brother Tostig, landed in the north. Harold marched his army nearly 200 miles in just 4 days to confront them. At Stamford Bridge, the Anglo-Saxons won a crushing victory. Hardrada was killed, his army destroyed. But the cost was enormous. Harold's men were exhausted, battered, and bloodied. And just as they began to recover, word came. William of Normandy had landed on the southern coast. Harold had no choice. He turned his weary army south once more, forced to march without rest into yet another battle. By the time the Anglo-Saxons reached Hastings, Harold had perhaps 7,000 to 8,000 men, mostly infantry, farmers and freemen armed with axes and spears, shielded by their famous shield wall. They fought on foot, disciplined and stubborn, but they lacked cavalry or archers in significant numbers. William, by contrast, brought a more modern, flexible army. His forces included armored knights on horseback, trained to charge and wield, archers with longbows, and spearmen who could fight in both tight ranks and looser formations. On paper, William had the advantage, but Harold's shield wall, strong and unbroken, had never been breached in battle. At sunrise on October 14th, the fields of Hastings erupted in war. William sent his archers forward first, loosing waves of arrows into the Anglo-Saxon line. The missiles rattled against the wall of shields, but inflicted little damage. Next came the Norman infantry, advancing uphill against the Anglo-Saxons. They struck hard, but the shield wall held. The Saxons fought shoulder to shoulder, axes swinging, spears thrusting, their formation absorbing the blow. Finally, William unleashed his cavalry, charging up the slope with the thunder of hooves. The Norman knights crashed against the wall of wood and iron and failed. Horses reared, men fell, and the Saxons stood firm. The battle was far from over, but already it was clear. Harold's men could not be broken by brute force. Frustration grew in the Norman ranks. Some units began to flee downhill in panic, or so it seemed. The Anglo-Saxons, seeing what looked like a retreat, broke formation to pursue them. It was a fatal mistake. The retreat was a ruse, a feigned flight ordered by William. As the Saxons chased, the Norman cavalry wheeled around, surrounding and cutting them down. Slowly, gaps began to open in the once impenetrable shield wall. Still, the Saxons fought with desperate courage. For hours, the battle raged with neither side giving ground. The noise of steel on steel, the cries of the wounded, and the relentless rhythm of the clash echoed across the field. And then came the moment that legend remembers. According to the Bayeux Tapestry, the great embroidery that tells the story of the conquest, King Harold was struck by an arrow in the eye. Historians debate whether this actually happened, or whether Harold was killed in another way, perhaps cut down by Norman knights in the melee. But the image of the arrow endures because it captures the sudden collapse of Anglo-Saxon resistance. With Harold dead, the shield wall finally wavered. Leaderless, the Saxons began to scatter. The Normans surged forward, pressing their advantage, and by nightfall the battlefield belonged to William. Victory at Hastings made William the undisputed claimant to the English throne. On Christmas Day, 1066, he was crowned William I of England, remembered forever as William the Conqueror. But Hastings was more than just the end of one king and the rise of another. It was a turning point in the very identity of England. William's victory at Hastings did not simply put a new man on the throne, it transformed an entire nation. The language of the conquerors, Norman French, began to mingle with the tongue of the Anglo-Saxons, weaving together the earliest strands of what would one day become modern English. The laws and structures of governance shifted as well, as William imposed a feudal system, carving up the land and granting it to his loyal supporters, thereby reshaping the very fabric of England's nobility. The landscape itself bore the mark of conquest. Stone fortresses rose where wooden halls once stood, with the Tower of London looming as a stark reminder of Norman power. Even the rhythms of daily life changed as Anglo-Saxon traditions gave way or blended into Norman customs. Within a single generation, England was no longer the same kingdom it had been. It had become something entirely new, born from conquest and remade in the image of its Norman rulers. Why does Hastings still matter nearly 1,000 years later? Because it was more than a battle. It was a hinge of history. Had Harold won, England might have remained a Saxon kingdom, its culture and language profoundly different from what we know today. Instead, the Norman victory tied England to continental Europe, setting the stage for centuries of rivalry, empire, and transformation. And in the heart of the story, there remains that arrow. Whether it truly pierced Harold's eye or not, it symbolizes the fragility of kingdoms, how the fate of nations can turn in an instant on the flight of a single shaft of wood and iron. The Battle of Hastings lasted one day, but in those few hours, the course of English history was rewritten. On the ridge near Hastings, Harold Godwinson fought with courage, but fell in defeat. William the Conqueror rose in triumph, reshaping a nation. And the arrow, half legend, half truth, became the enduring emblem of that moment when an old world died and a new one was born. More than 9 centuries later, the Bayeux Tapestry still shows us the scene, the charge of knights, the clash of shields, and a fallen king struck by fate. It reminds us that history is often decided not only by armies or kings, but by a single moment, a single choice, a single arrow. And that is why, even today, we remember Hastings 1066 as the day the arrow changed England forever.